Let's have our next question, please.
Graham Bunch. Is President Obama's decision to allow a mosque and Islamic cultural centre near to Ground Zero the right one?
Ruth Deitch, is the decision by President Obama, he's talked about his support for religious freedom, it's not actually his decision, is his apparent support for this mosque and cultural centre near to Ground Zero the right one?
Well, you can tackle this from many perspectives. I was thinking when I heard the last question that wouldn't it be a good thing if all the money that is raised for mosques actually went to help, say, Pakistan or other worthy causes. I don't know where the money's coming from. Now, clearly, under the Constitution, there is a right to practice your religion, and it is possible to build a mosque in that particular site. In fact, there are all sorts of ordinary shops and other types of churches and so on near that Ground Zero spot. So it is legitimate. But I find it quite chilling that they should think of doing this. And while on the one hand it is legitimate, you would have thought that those who give planning permission might have thought otherwise. There is a huge sensitivity there. And what I find is extremely upsetting is that those who are behind the mosque should not have said to themselves, really, we should not be doing this. We should spend the money in some other way. We should go and build our mosque quietly in a less sensitive spot. I was reminded a bit of the nuns in Poland who built a church, I think it was on top of Auschwitz, or very close to Auschwitz. And of course it was well-meaning, but it was deeply, deeply upsetting. And I think in the end they removed it. There is this tendency, I think especially in Islam, to build on top of what has been conquered. And that is what brings up unpleasant associations. So yes, it is legitimate, but I do deplore the instinct that has led them to decide to build it there. And one simply wishes they would take it somewhere else.
Can you expand a little on why you find it chilling?
Because of the lack of sensitivity. If one is going to be integrated into a country, and I'm not talking about this country, we have different issues, but America has in the past been the great melting pot. And it has brought people together with a respect for, indeed love of, everything that America stands for, whatever that is. I know it's a bit unpopular now, but in general that has been the case. And I think to be so insensitive as to what the American people feel about that spot, which is so important to them, shows a failure to integrate.
Alex von Tunzelman.
I completely disagree. I think actually if you look at what America stands for, if you look at the Constitution, the First Amendment makes very clear that the establishment of a place of worship should not be limited by any laws that are passed. I think one of the things I very much admire the American Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers of America. They were free thinkers mostly. They had very strong notions of religious freedom and tolerance. The Muslims who are building this centre, which actually isn't really a mosque, it's mostly a culinary school with a basketball court and a prayer room, they're Americans too, and I'm afraid they're covered under the Constitution. I see absolutely no reason why they should be discriminated against or pushed out from the system. There are actually already 2 mosques within a couple of blocks of Ground Zero, which have been operating since before the attacks without any problem whatsoever. And I think in the spirit of reconciliation, it's an excellent idea.
Maajid Nawaz.
Well, to quote Sarah Palin, I repudiate the whole fuss. I mean, I really don't understand what the big deal is, because I think time and time again we play into the hands of the clash of civilizations rhetoric and the Al-Qaeda choice between Islam and the West. And there is absolutely no choice. It's a false paradigm. Muslims are born and raised in the West and have served in the British Army for a very long time, and the same with America. Now, with the mosque example, I mean, first of all, it's not in Ground Zero, but even if it was close to Ground Zero, it's not a sign of American weakness at all. It's not a sign of Islam conquering America whatsoever. In fact, it's a sign of American strength, and it's a sign not of Islam conquering America, but of freedom of religion reigning supreme. And I think that's what America should be proud of, and the fact that they can accommodate a mosque in that vicinity, as they accommodate all other sorts of places of worship, is something they should be very happy with, and they should spread that message around the world to say they are not at war with Islam. But if they make this an issue of America versus Islam, and if they hold the Muslims of New York responsible for the actions of a few terrorists, then what they end up doing is reinforcing Osama bin Laden's rhetoric that they are at war against Islam and pushing more and more people in this polarized worldview that it's us versus them, and it's not us versus them. So I think that it's really been blown out of proportion and really doesn't deserve all of this fuss.
Douglas Murray.
Well, I don't agree. I think it does deserve this fuss. When most people heard about this proposal some time ago now, most of our jaws dropped at the very idea that a mega mosque, a huge cultural centre with a mosque inside it, should be thought of being built on this site. The way I see it is this. If you take the view that Maajid just has, then the answer to everything is Islam. If towers come down, it's because of misinterpretation of Islam. Therefore, we must build a mosque that's a good interpretation of Islam. Either way, the answer is Islam. I don't think this is the case. I'm all for people having the right to practice and believe anything they want. I don't mind that at all, and the American Constitution makes very appropriate provision for that. But there's something else in this, and Ruth mentioned it earlier, which is the issue of sensitivities. You can have the legal right to do all sorts of things, but in societies that work, people make private decisions and public decisions about things that they will do which will aggravate their neighbours and so on. And I'd say that this is a very significant moment for the following reason. We in the West hear from the Islamic world and from within Muslim communities in our own countries all the time calls for their sensitivities to be respected. You can't say certain things about their prophets. You can't even draw their prophets. You can't write about their prophets. You can't make musicals about their prophets or films about their prophets. All sorts of things. And some of these are what's more backed up by not very covert threats. Now, I think this is a very good moment to say to Muslims in America and to Muslims in Britain and around the world, fine, we hear a very great deal from you about your sensitivities. Well, we have sensitivities too. And we would very much like you to recognise that. Yes, you can legally build this huge cultural centre just by ground zero, but we think that in the interests of a pluralistic and genuinely open society, it would be better if you took it elsewhere. And we will learn a lot from the people trying to build this centre when we find out whether they are willing to take that offer of land elsewhere or not.
So can I Douglas, you're a really nice person in person, but when you go on air, something duplicitous and strange happens.
I think the same with you, Maajid,
yes,
don't worry.
Can I well, I'm glad you think I'm a nice person, and perhaps we can, talk afterwards, but I just want to comment on what you've said.
Feel free to talk now.
Yes, I will on this issue, and that is that I remember during the cartoons affair, you have explicitly stated on air that Muslims do not have the right not to be offended by others. Now you're claiming the same right, that you don't want to be offended by the building of this mosque.
I'm saying they can offend.
There is no right not to be offended.
It's a bad idea in
Douglas,
this case.
let me ask you a question. Is there a right not to be offended by something?
You have, you seem to know my work very well, Maajid. I'm very flattered. Well, yes, I think that we, in grown-up societies, realise that they have to be offended at times. Yes, but
so please be offended by the construction of this mosque.
There are times when the offence is organised, is grotesque like this, and when you are walking on... Yes, you do, as I repeated earlier, you do have the right, if you are supporting this mosque, if you are building this mosque, you have the right to tread over very many people's sensitivities. You do have that right. But I would say, in this case, you should not exercise it.
Right. Well, I have defended the right of those who draw the cartoons of the Prophet. I've defended the entry of Geert Wilders into this country when he was banned by the then government, and I defend the right of those building the mosque, because no one has the right not to be offended.
Ruth Teach.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, but what has actually happened in practice is that we have refrained from publishing those cartoons.
Exactly.
We have refrained from criticising certain things, for example, attitudes to women. There was a play, I think, in the West End that was closed down because of Muslim protests, or was it even in Birmingham? There have been things where people have kept quiet, although legally they could do it. And I think that compliment should be returned. Respecting each other outside of the law, under the umbrella of the law, is a two-way process, and it's indicative of living in the West that you have rights, but you're careful about how you use them.
Yeah. Sorry, I'd just like to come back first of all and say that actually it was a Sikh play in Birmingham, and I think if we start conflating Sikhs and Muslims, I mean, it's definitely not the same thing. Second of all, I don't like this kind of us and them mentality that is coming out of this. It's not us and them anyway. The people who want to build this centre are Americans. You know, Americans come in all faiths, all colours, you know, all origins. And it's not an us and them question. Furthermore, that the Muslims that are actually looking to build this centre are, I think they're Sufis. They're very moderate, progressive Muslims. It's not at all the same thing as Al-Qaeda. And to conflate it, to say, we're doing this, so you have to do this, that's not how this works. I don't like this identification of me as we against this Muslim world. I hope that we've moved a bit beyond that, frankly.
Douglas Murray.
The first thing is that we don't know where the money's coming from to build this mosque. It's a huge sum of money. I think it's something like $70 million. And this isn't an easy sum of money to come by. We had the same issue in London recently when the Tablighi Jamaat sect wanted to build a mega mosque near the site of the Olympics. And the question then was also, but who's going to provide these millions of pounds? There are all sorts of very legitimate questions, actually, contra to what you've just said.
Do you worry about the financing of many buildings?
Yes, I do. I very much worry when somebody says that they're building something for one purpose and it's actually for another. And I think it's legitimate and right that people should question where funds are coming from for a building like this.
Yeah, but Douglas, Sufis are being blown up by Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, and Sufis have also become suicide bombers. So I don't think your comparison holds.
Well, I just think that, yes, questioning the funding, questioning the views of Imam Raouf, for example, these are all legitimate discussions to be had, but they are separate to the fact that the mosque, the people who are building the mosque have a legal right to build a mosque on private land. And I think that questions of funding come down to governance. And those same questions of governance apply to mosques in the UK. And yes, mosques do need better governance. Yes, sometimes, many times, and I'm one of the most vociferous critics of this, Muslims for far too long tolerate extremism within their midst, which is why we set up the Quilliam Foundation. And we are speaking against extremism every day. I tour in Pakistan to challenge extremism. But we have to separate the fact that people have the right to practice their faith from the issue of extremism and concern about people abusing centres. Because if we do not, then what we're in effect doing is saying that bin Laden is right, and that the world is divided into two spheres, those who are Muslim and those who are everyone else, and the two spheres are fighting each other. And that's simply not true, Douglas.
The reason why the money is a big issue is, as we all know, I hope I'm not preempting a question, Pakistan is having difficulty getting money together for the floods. If there's money to build a mosque, why isn't it going where it's really needed? How come there is $70 million there and it's not going where it's needed right now? I mean, there'd be criticism if someone started building, a golden palace here when there was better use for the money.
And if I may add on that, of course, it's the countries that Pakistan and other majority Islamic countries are forever criticising, Britain and America, that have come up with the majority of the aid for this. It's a very good example. Why don't, if we hear so much about the Muslim brothers and the fellow Muslims, why don't they stump up with the cash? Why do they spend it on a centre like this?
I think you'll find that the plans for the mosque were put in place long before the flood crisis hit Pakistan.
Maybe Imam Raouf could make a good gesture and say, I don't need to build this offensive building. I will give it to my brothers suffering in Pakistan. That would be a lovely gesture, which we would all applaud.
No, I'm sorry. You support Tony Blair giving money rather to the poor people in Iraq. You supported him giving money to the British Armed Forces. But here you're saying that the money to build a mosque must go to Pakistan. I think duplicity is what I think I'd ask you to avoid, Douglas, please.
Alex.
I'd ask you.
I don't think that you would say the same thing about a Christian organisation. I mean, there are an awful lot of good causes in this world. I don't really think the Muslim world is actually a massive homogeneous block anyway. And why they should give money to one thing or another. I mean, there are plenty of buildings that we build all the time as Westerners who live in what is, at least Britain is a kind of nominally Christian nation. I'm sure there are plenty of good causes in, say, Latin America, fellow Christians that we could give money to, and yet we don't. I mean, so I think to criticise us on that basis is just absurd, frankly.
All right, we're going to leave that there.